Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Bottom Line. I'm your host, Lauren Kalil. Our show is brought to you by the U.S. Army Warrior Fitness Team, which provides awareness of Army opportunities while serving. Team members are active duty soldiers that compete in CrossFit and strongman, strongwoman competitions, both nationally and internationally. To learn more, make sure you check out the link in our description. On today's episode, I have Brian Friend here to discuss more changes happening in training camps. Katrin, David's daughter, Amanda Barnhart, and Sam Quant, all former CompTrain athletes, they will now be working with HWPO. For Sam, he's been working with HWPO coach Harry Pally for years. So it's not really too surprising there, Brian. But what are your thoughts on Katrin and Amanda making this move?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like just a couple of weeks ago or a week maybe, we were talking about Amanda making a change from CompTrain, moving back home to where she came from. We weren't really sure of all the details around that. So now we see that
Mhm.
in addition to moving home, she's also moving on to a different training program, in this case HWPO. And obviously for Katrin, David's daughter as well, having, prior to last season, spent 6 or 7 years as part of basically the premier athlete at CompTrain. It is definitely notable that they're leaving there. And if you dig back into kind of the history of CompTrain and the history of just CrossFit in the Northeast, both Matt Fraser and Matt O'Keefe have a lot of history with Ben Bergeron. They
Mhm.
were, in some capacity, friends, acquaintances, business partners, and learned from each other through that growth in the 2013, 14, 15 season when O'Keefe, first discovered Fraser, expressed that belief in him and brought him along. They competed at the East Coast Championships. Fraser would compete there. That was a competition that Ben Bergeron created. And it was one of the early places that people who were in that part of the world saw the potential that, Fraser could eventually have. If you know anything about Ben Bergeron historically, and you've watched some of his podcasts going back years and years, he would talk about the fact that it's not uncommon in CrossFit or in necessarily in other industries for someone who has a well-established program like CompTrain is to either bring athletes or coaches up through their ranks and then watch them leave and go out on their own and create their own thing. And he talks about that as a healthy progression. And I think that it's a really good perspective for coaches to have, that just because you're coaching someone now doesn't mean that they need you forever. In fact, if you can teach them something that allows them to go off on their own or go on to the next stage of their journey and do their own thing, open their own gym, find a new batch of athletes to coach, start their own training program, that's actually great. It creates another opportunity for more people to get on board from the coaching or training perspective. And I'm pretty confident that if we talk to Ben, he would recognize that. I'm
Mm.
sure that it is kind of hard for him because some of those athletes, especially, in the case of Katrin, is very close to him and his family. But I think that they still have an amicable rapport. And he's probably, it's not probably bothering him too much to see them move on with their journey, because that's ultimately what this is. It's a journey, and all of these athletes are trying to fine tune. We're talking about some of the best in the world. So they're just trying to fine tune. And sometimes that doesn't mean that you're moving from something to something better. It's just
Mhm.
from something to something different, and a different perspective and a fresh opportunity is not necessarily mean better or worse. It just means new.
Well, and it's not uncommon for this to happen after the games every year, a couple months, couple weeks. It kind of depends. Maybe before the start of the new season, we see athletes changing training camps, changing coaches, and other sports, the NFL, basketball. You see this happen too. But do you think that it's noteworthy that all three of these athletes were former CompTrain athletes?
Maybe it could, it's kind of like I don't know a ton of the details or the intimacy of it. It could
Mhm.
be a coincidence, and it could be that they, developed relationships over their career with probably either O'Keefe or Harry, that were something that was meaningful to them in addition to. And who knows? There's sometimes it might not even been something that was on their radar, but the opportunity came along. Maybe Fraser or O'Keefe or Harry Pally reached out to Amanda and Katrin and just said, "Hey, just throwing it out there. We're trying to build this thing and start a new thing, and we would love to be a part of the next step of your process, your pursuit of the goals that you
Mhm.
have in this sport, in this space." And maybe they were like, "Man, I hadn't really thought about that, but I want to take it." So I think there's just as good of a chance that it's a coincidence and an opportunity that was more unplanned than anything else.
Mm. When it comes to Katrin, though, I think that I personally was most surprised by her joining HWPO, especially, she moved back home. She's been training with Annie. Do you think that this is the right move for her to not only get back to the games, but also possibly be in contention for a top 10, top 5 spot again?
I mean, I think it would be exciting if that ends up being the reality. But I also, as soon as I heard about this, and it just dawned on me that Matt and Katrin, they didn't necessarily train together that often, but they were both coached by Ben for the period of time where she
Right.
was winning championships. They both won together in 2016 under his guidance and leadership. And I think they would often do workouts in different in their own locations, but they would share
Mhm.
their scores and kind of compare and compete against each other. So that was like the measuring stick for Matt before he moved on to Tia. And for Katrin, that was, probably in terms of a male counterpart of training, the best she's ever competed against. And also he produced the best results on the floor for her. Like that 2016 win was like that was important to back up what they did in 2015. And she was training with, or not maybe with, but as a part of the same group with Matt that year. So again, there's this history to all of these relationships that are, we don't maybe know the nuanced details of it, but it's not necessarily that surprising to see some of these people kind of coming back together.
So we were able to catch up with Matt O'Keefe, who works with HWPO, and he did say that all of these athletes will spend significant time together throughout the season, but none of them are relocating to Vermont full time. How do you think that that plays a role in changing of camps, especially because these athletes have worked for so long in person with their coaches?
There's a lot kind of to unpack in that question. I mean, one of the things that I've noticed this year, and you alluded to it, because these aren't the only athletes on the move, there
Mhm.
seems to be this like high, this exodus or whatever to Naples. All these athletes are going down to Naples to train in person with Matt Torres and the Brute training crew. And I
Mhm.
think about the difference between that and what's happening here at HWPO, and especially in light of Mallory O'Brien and Emma Carey, both of whom are young athletes that without a doubt, regardless of how good they already are, definitely benefit from having that in-person coaching, that eyes on them at all times, building those good habits that they can then lean upon for the rest of their career. In the case of Mallory O'Brien, she's not being joined by two other women that are competing for top 10 podium, maybe game spots in person every day.
Right.
So there's not that distraction. In Emma Carey's case, we see that there is now Olivia Sulik there. Fisa Gaffi's moving there. A couple of the other young guys are moving down there. So there's a lot more going on. And you wonder how that environment's going to be for her. Danielle Brandon's there. That's another big time, big name athlete. And so for HWPO and Mal O'Brien, I think this is actually probably not too, you know, disruptive of their normal flow. And it probably just creates opportunities like they were already doing last year to invite in or bring up different athletes. Justin Medeiros went out to Vermont. Hopper made several trips there. They had a little throwdown with Danielle Brandon and Dallin Pepper
Yeah.
before the game. So it would make perfect sense. Katrin comes over for a week or two. They have a couple maybe weekend training camps. They get some eyes on her here and there. Amanda makes a trip up here and there. So you have an opportunity throughout the season to kind of check in and measure yourself against each other, but there's not that day-to-day competition. And there's not, the attention that Mal's used to receiving in person there is not being diluted by an influx of other athletes that are
Mhm.
living there full time.
And speaking of other athletes that have moved, we just got news that eighth fittest woman on earth, Gabi Migala, and Christoph Horvath, they are leaving the program. Gabi, she worked with the team for the past 3 years under the coaching of John Singleton. Specifically for Gabi, is this the right move for her, especially at this stage in her career, Brian?
Yeah, great. It's a great question. And I think that it's a question that athletes and coaches are often, it's one of those things you might not know when you do it if it's the right thing or not. And it might be, a year or two down the road that you look back and figure it out. So and I think John talks about this in the article here.
Mhm.
They have intentional conversations like this every year after the games. And I'm sure that a lot of the premier coaches, and especially the ones that have been doing it for a long time and with some of the best athletes, have a similar practice to evaluate. How did this season go? Where are you at as an athlete mentally looking forward? Where am I at as a coach? And have those conversations. Because if it's not a good fit for whatever reason, and it doesn't have to be even a competition related thing, it could just be that Gabby and Christoph are ready to move on in their life from a geographical location. When COVID came, they were immediately on my radar. I saw that two of them with Jacqueline and John go to Mallorca, kind of create this little bubble environment for themselves where they could focus on getting better. And they
Mhm.
definitely have. Christoph's come a long way, even though he hasn't made the games yet. He's improved so much as an athlete, and the results speak for themselves for Gabi and Jacqueline of how valuable those 2 years were, of what they've been able to do at the games the past 2 seasons compared to any time previously in their career. So I think that, it was a big move for Gabi and Christoph to go there to Mallorca and to spend those 3 years with John and those 2 years living there in an island in the Mediterranean. It's not that uncommon. We've talked about this with Amanda. We've talked about it with Katrin last year, for athletes just to want to either go back home or move on to whatever's next. And Gabi hasn't necessarily told us what that is, but I think that there's no doubt about it. The time she spent with the program was critical for a development of athlete and brought her a long way. And she's looking to build upon that going forward. I don't think it's any slight at John or what he's done over there. It's just the next step in the journey for her and Christoph.
So what is your bottom line to all of these athletes changing training camps this time of the year?
I think the bottom line is kind of twofold. I don't think that you necessarily want to read anything more into this than what it is, which is the pursuit of excellence, and that is a difficult decision for athletes to know when to stay and when to go, and how long is long enough to give someone an opportunity before it's time to say, you know what, I've appreciated everything here, but I'm ready to move on to the next thing. So this is obviously, there's a lot of athletes making moves this year, and I'm fully expecting that some of them will reap the benefits of that, and others might see some of the struggles of it, because there will be some new stuff, and who's going to be in which of those categories is what we'll have to wait to see.
Who will have growing pains and who will prosper from the decisions?
Yep.
We will wait to see. Brian, thank you so much. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Lauren.